So this is the fourth video on relationships God's way. Last video we talked about marriage. This time we're going to talk about family. And family. Even with talking about family, we're going to talk about friendship some too, because our family members are often our first best friends, and that changes as we grow older and as we choose our own path and develop our own worldviews and stuff. A lot of times, cousins who were best friends will become totally distant, and it's kind of heartbreaking. And we'll see that that happens because of the unequally yoked passage, or because sometimes it's just growing apart, sometimes it's separated by distance. So those first friendships, is even in family, it makes a great impact in our life. And I remember how precious the friendships my kids had with their cousins. Those were their best friends, and some of the sweetest memories and sweetest days. And um, with my cousins when I was younger, I did not have as close as a friendship, because I was brought up in such a different home and different environment. Um, but I've got friends, I used to watch their friendships with their cousins, and even aunts and uncles and stuff that were in close age. My girls were close to one of their aunts who was um, not just a few years older than they. So there again, they have a lot of good memories. But you can also look back and see where those first friendships, the family members that we hang out with, and it don't even have to be, close in age, peers. I remember for myself, my aunts and uncles that I was extremely close to, they had an impact on my attitude and the personality as it developed. They helped set expectations for future relationships. And fortunately, I could say I was blessed with some wonderful aunts and uncles. They were protective. They always gave advice, pretty much lined up with God's word. Even my family relationships with my grandparents. Now, I never had a chance to get to know my mom's family. She died when my mom's mother died when she was 16, and then my mom's dad moved in with us for a while. And I remember there the latter part of his life, him getting saved and seeing the change that Christ made in his life, because he was an alcoholic originally. So mom kind of shielded us from a lot of that until he got saved, and there was such a huge difference in his life. But I had aunts and uncles on both sides, my mom and dad's side, who knew how to love unconditionally. They knew how to nurture and protect. They had guidelines set in their home that they expected their kids to follow. So there were those, 4 or 5 that had a wonderful, positive impact on me. Um, and then, there are people who come into your life that's like family, and you see them choose to make decisions that's best for those children in the family because they love them sometimes more than blood relatives do. I know I can speak personally to this because my best friend, Carolyn, um, she looks at my children as her own, and she literally makes decisions based on a love for them. Um, in her life, she's single, and in her life in dating, she's determined to not let herself be caught in toxic situations anymore. She's determined to make choices that help Tori, especially, because Tori's younger. My other 3 are grown and married, and 2 have their own kids. And so Tori's still at home and 15 and going through that age where she's in love with, every celebrity guy that meets her criteria. Um, and so in meeting friends and stuff that's not been the best of friends, Carolyn makes conscious decisions to try to set examples and not do anything that would make Tori think it's okay to let people walk all over you and mistreat you. So, I'm so thankful for that. And the reason this is so important is because, not only do those first friendships make an impact, but there's something I call fluid attitudes. And what that means is that it's basically learned behavior. Fluid, it runs constantly through your veins, and bad attitudes can become a way of life. It can become a part of who you are if you are around that constantly. Um, we know that learned behavior is a response to the stimuli in your life. And our relationships, the people we hang out with, the people we listen to, the people we gravitate toward, they are stimuli. They set the tone for the choices we make. Um, it develops out of our personalities, a child's personality and their attitudes develop out of the things that they experience. So if we're allowing drama, negative drama, to constantly be in their life, then that's what they're going to develop. And then we're going to wake up one day and say, oh, where's my sweet little baby? But there were things that we allowed into our life that we should not have. And I can look up back on that and see times that I did that myself. And I'll see a behavior or personality that, my children have picked up. And I'm like, where did that come from? Their dad and I certainly didn't teach it. And then the more I look into the situation, because I'm one of those who will just tear it apart and examine it and mull over it. And then I realized it would be circumstances or attitudes that we allowed ourselves to develop because we didn't wisely set boundaries. We've always been in the ministry, and even before we were in ministry, I don't want to say professionally, but as far as my husband being a pastor and stuff, and me helping with a Christian school, even before that, we've always tried to minister to others. And there's been many times in our desire to help others that we would allow people to stay in our lives longer than they should. Once they show you they're not going to change and they're not going to embrace your values in a Christian concept, you have to kind of love them from a distance. You have to learn how to minister to them without them becoming your best friends and interacting on a regular basis, because it will affect you, it will affect your home, it will affect your children. So with these fluid attitudes comes also a need to please. I've seen that in my youngest daughter. She developed that need to please everyone and keep everyone happy. And that kind of came out of I determined from the beginning when my husband was pastor, and I was not going to fall into that same trap that many pastors' wives do, trying to keep everybody happy, be everybody's friend. And I ended up doing exactly that at one of our pastorates. And then when I woke up and realized what I was doing, and I came back to stand against it, I came back a little too hard. So that's the thing. When you realize you've made a mistake and you need to fix it, often because you've let that take place to begin with, you'll try to jump out of it and fight your way out of it, and it ends up doing more damage than if you'd have sat back and done a lot more praying in my situation, and rationally, a little bit rationally try to, not excluding all emotion, but rationally trying to reason how to handle those situations. There's an innate fear of rejection when we allow the wrong people, when we get too attached to the wrong people, because then we feel that if we do not please them and they reject us, that something is innately wrong with us, and that's not the case. We have secular sciences and Christian disciplines. Those kind of they're in conflict. The advice that our family gives us, if they're of a secular mindset, then they're going to give us advice from a secular worldview. If they have a faith-based mindset, then they're going to give us advice from a faith-based view. Now, I'm not saying cut off all family. And children who are in non-Christian homes and somehow God gets hold of their lives and they get saved, they're just stuck there to some degree because they still have to respect their parents. They still have to obey. And, so they need support and love from Christian friends and Christian adults. But that's for another topic. I don't want to get too far there because I could do a whole video series on that. But we have to encourage these kids to be obedient and be respectful. But at the same time, somehow find some way to help them stay grounded in their faith. Because if their parents force their beliefs on them and their non-Christian beliefs that the parents embrace, that is going to affect the kids as well. Family is such an important part of who we are and who we become. The Council of Foundations says that families should be recognized as an individual culture themselves. We have all these different cultures, from people coming in from other countries, or we have traditions that's been passed down throughout our families and through nationalities. But the family itself, each family unit, should be considered an individual culture. The Council of Foundations states, values set the basic tone for the family foundation. And I would go even further and say it not only sets the tone for the family foundation, but it sets the tone for adulthood and individual adulthood as children grow. Families are the first people to fulfill our emotional needs. So if we're choosing to hang out with family members, we can't throw them away. We love them when we see them. We minister to them. We associate with them. But often they cannot become our best friends because they fulfill an emotional need. They give us our security and our belonging. And if the activities and the attitudes around that are set in toxic situations, then that's what's going to take root in the heart. So when we see that happening, we have to be willing to say, hey, we got to flee this. There is a fleeing time. And these are situations, here's 4 situations that we need to flee the relationship as a close relationship, as something that is an integral part of our life. Sorry, that's my phone. Trying to figure out how to turn it out. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, abuse, and I don't think anyone would argue with this, but anytime there is abuse involved, it's okay to walk away from that individual. If a child is being abused, the rest of the family needs to step in and try to help that child out. And I'll go ahead and tell you that I know this from experience. You step in and try to help a child that's claiming to be abused. If they're not really being abused, you will be thrown over the bus, ran over, backed up, ran over, and backed up again. So, I come to the point where the next child that tells me that they're being mistreated or abused, I was not going to help. But that's wrong because it could be the case. I'm going to have to do more relying on prayer power and researching the situation and kind of find out more. Sometimes it's better just to go ahead and call the authorities, DHR or something, and let them look into it because they can look into it from a more neutral standpoint than the family member trying to help. So in cases of abuse, we do need to step in and help. But if we're the ones in the abusive relationships, we got to get out. Got to run. Find someone who can help us and get out. A person who is a taker, they're always a taker, and they only give when it's convenient for them or when they might get something out of it. And when I say that, I'm talking about money, but I'm also talking about your time and your resources. Your emotional, they just feed off your emotions. Time to run. And then those who are a negative influence, it specifically goes against your faith. If you have family members that try to get you to do things that you have determined not to do. I know that when Ronnie and I were dating, there was one of his cousins that, he was trying to introduce me to his family, and I was trying to get to know them. And one of his cousins' house we would go to every few weekends, and they would grill out and stuff. But the thing was, is they would always try to convince Ronnie that he needed to be drinking with them. And Ronnie said that they had always done that when he was, even when he was younger, and neither one of us drank. And so they couldn't just simply fellowship with us and associate with us. The guys especially would try to, convince Ronnie to have a beer. So in situations like that, you got to quit going. Quit hanging out. If they can't respect your values and beliefs, you may have to quit going. And people who especially and purposely try to get you to make bad choices, got to get away from them. And then this is something that people might argue and say it's not that big a deal, but I'm telling you it is, and that's argumentative, complaining, and critical people. It is bad for your health physically. It is bad for your health emotionally and spiritually. And, the scripture says a lot about not complaining and not having a critical spirit. It tells us what the fruits of the Spirit are. It tells us the type of attitudes to avoid. And people who are constantly doing that around you will drag you down. You'll either wake up totally depressed, feeling hopeless, or you'll end up adapting to those attitudes and behaviors yourself. And then you'll find yourself physically and emotionally oppressed and often have to seek help to get out of those situations. So even in dealing with family, we've got to choose wisely who becomes our friends and who remain simply blood relations.